The Mario & Luigi and Paper Mario series have some of my favorite games of all time. Whether it's their innovative blend of RPG and action elements, their colorful cast of characters and hilarious dialogue, or just simply the way they bring the world of Mario to life in ways that the more traditional entries can't quite seem to match. These games are beloved by many, and rightfully so. I haven't necessarily agreed with the direction that these series have taken in recent years, or maybe recent decade, but 2 bombshell announcements and 2 consecutive Nintendo Directs this year have offered a sliver of hope that Nintendo can still course correct. Super Mario RPG, the game that spawned both of these series, is not only coming to Nintendo Switch, it's being remade, and quite faithfully by the looks of it. From everything we've seen so far, none of the quirky characters have been lost or sterilized by the corporate regulations of modern Mario, or should I say, Big Mario. That means Geno and Mallow are still in, and Peach's ? Even the short and pudgy character designs have been lovingly carried over. This is kind of a big deal, because it means Nintendo is treating the remake with care. They're spending actual time and resources on the game. I mean, more than just the one guy they got going on Cool ROMs every few months and picking a game at random. So to celebrate, I wanted to finally kick off a discussion about one of my favorite video game franchises of all time, beginning with the game that started it all. Despite being kinda overshadowed by Super Mario 64 and the overall N64 launch only months later, Super Mario RPG is perhaps one of the most important games in Mario history, because it was one of the first games to prove the Mushroom Kingdom was an interesting place to be. And above all else, it demonstrated that not only could Mario work as an RPG, it kicked ass as one. Super Mario RPG is an all-time classic. Not only does it hold up to and even outshine many of its modern counterparts, the game is even more impressive when you look at it through the lens of 1996. Given the dozen or so Mario RPGs that are available today, the game's basic premise doesn't exactly feel novel. Mario runs around and jumps in the overworld, he fights in turn-based battles using timed button presses, and talks to funny mushroom guys that can say some unexpectedly dark things. But the fact that this foundation has persisted for so many years across that many sequels is actually a testament to just how much Super Mario RPG got right on its first attempt. Back in 1996, this guy would have been the last person you'd expect to find starring in his own JRPG. The genres were basically polar opposites. The classic 2D Marios are all about pure and simple platforming, with levels never lasting longer than a few minutes. These games are fast-paced, requiring precise timing and quick reflexes to land some pretty tricky jumps. RPGs, on the other hand, tend to be a bit slower and more deliberate. These games can span dozens of hours, with a complex overarching narrative and a more serious tone. The turn-based battles allow you to make decisions at your own pace, rather than responding to events in real time. Exploration generally isn't a major highlight. Usually you'll wander around on a flat map until you see something you can interact with or encounter an enemy. This isn't to say that there weren't exceptions, or that these games weren't fun in their own right, they just weren't really Mario. Clearly, to make this whole Mario RPG thing work, Nintendo and Square had a lot of ground to cover. So you might be surprised to learn that they basically nailed it on their first try. The core is still very much an RPG, but every facet of the game has a distinct Mario flavor to it. You'll battle enemies by jumping on them or whacking them with a hammer. The overworld is littered with platforming challenges, and items and coins are found in blocks that you can open by jumping underneath them. You even navigate around using warp pipes, and collect starmen to become invincible and defeat enemies in a single touch. One of my favorite parts of the game is how it revolutionized turn-based combat. The system that Nintendo and Square settled on worked beautifully, melding together the best aspects of both genres into an accessible, Mario-themed package. Battles are still turn-based, but to keep players engaged, they introduced a concept known as timed hits. This system allows players to time their button presses in tune with their attacks to do more damage. So as you go to whack an enemy with your hammer, or spray bullets in their face, pressing A at just the right time will play a satisfying chime and boost the attack's power. When it's the enemy's turn, you can press the button just as their attack lands to receive less damage. Time it perfectly, and you could even reduce the damage to 0. Personally, I think this is kind of genius. It makes the player feel like they're actively participating in the battle, and it gives a sense of ownership to every attack that you choose. I also like that it gives me something to do when I'd otherwise just be waiting for some attack animations to play out. Take Mario's Fire Orb move for example. The more you hit the attack button, the more fireballs Mario will launch at his enemy. So every time you pull that attack out, you're going to be mashing that button like crazy to make sure you deal the most amount of damage possible. Or with Mario's Super Jump, you can stomp on the enemy repeatedly as long as you continue to time your button presses right. The timing gets harder as you go, but if you have the reflexes, you have the potential to deal massive damage. There's even an NPC that will keep track of your highest score and reward you with bonus equipment. When you take a good hard look at many traditional turn-based battle systems, a lot of times they can feel like they're not much more than a glorified menu screen. Many times it might even seem like the outcome of the battle is determined before it even begins. Having an auto button I guess doesn't really help their case either. With timed button presses, battles have a little more nuance to them. There's that slim chance to time a perfect dodge and reduce the enemy's attack damage to 0, or that the extra damage dealt by your attack might defeat your foe a turn early. There's more room for error, but also more opportunities for mastery. To be sure, timed hits aren't a flawless solution. It's kind of like adding a little minigame to each one of your attacks. But if done carelessly, these minigames can break the flow of battles and even drag them on unnecessarily. I think this game strikes a great balance by keeping the button prompts fairly simple, but it is an issue that some later games in the series would grapple with. Over the years, turn-based battle systems have come up with all kinds of clever mechanics to differentiate themselves, but action commands have and always will be one of my favorites. And it seems like Nintendo was a fan as well, because it became a staple in basically every other Mario RPG that came after. It's even appeared in several other modern RPGs as well. Most recently, the critically acclaimed Sea of Stars. That said, the battle system wasn't the only RPG aspect to the game to receive a Mario-inspired facelift. I've always found interesting overworld traversal to be the exception rather than the rule when it comes to JRPGs. Especially back in 1996, there wasn't really that much going on between battles. You might move around on a flat grid, occasionally find an item or two, bump into a random encounter every few steps, and then finally reach the boss at the end. Then buy some potions, new gear, and repeat. And to be clear, this isn't always a bad thing. The overworld can be a powerful way to immerse you in the world, especially with the help of an atmospheric soundtrack. But from a level design perspective, things are usually pretty basic. There certainly isn't any kind of reflex-based gameplay going on. Enter Super Mario RPG, which brings classic Mario platforming into an isometric world. People always say that Super Mario 64 was the first 3D Mario, but you could almost make the case that the first true 3D Mario platformer came out just a few months earlier. Now I know it's not true 3D, but Super Mario RPG's platforming kicks ass. The game's movement is probably my favorite out of any JRPG. It's pretty simple overall. You can walk and run in 8 different directions on an isometric plane. But by adding Mario's iconic jump ability into the mix, the developers gave themselves so much more freedom to design interesting level layouts. Running and jumping around the first fully realized 3D Mushroom Kingdom is really satisfying. I love how you can just jump on NPCs' heads and ride around on them. They're pretty undisturbed by it. This is one thing I feel like the later Mario RPGs are really missing out on. It's a lot of fun. There are even a few times where the game takes advantage of this, like how managing to jump on this guy will cause Mario to get dizzy and fall over, or how this one obscure frog coin requires you to do some quick platforming off a Toad's head. Beyond the game's lively locales, enemies both old and new will roam around the overworld and chase you into battle. Joining the likes of Chrono Trigger and Earthbound, Mario RPG bucks the trend of random encounters to have all of its battles take place with foes you've bumped into on the map. But unlike in those games, where mobility options are limited, Mario can easily run and hop past most unwanted encounters. The game even cleverly weaponizes this in some places, treating swarms of enemies like bob-ombs on conveyor belts as obstacles. If you're skilled enough, you can breeze right through. But if not, you can at least get some extra experience. And that's not the worst thing in the world. Given the freedom of movement, it can be pretty tempting to leap past every foe in sight. But the game's bosses, while not particularly difficult, will definitely wipe you out if you show up underleveled. In addition to enemy encounters, a surprising amount of platforming mechanics have found their way into the overworld as well. There's moving platforms, both the usual ones, as well as ones with special behaviors, like this little puzzle where there's these two platforms that sort of orbit around each other as you try to jump between them. There's falling donut platforms and bullet bill obstacle courses, those flowers that launch you in whatever direction you're facing, cannons that blast you across the level if you time your button presses right. There's even some classic Donkey Kong barrel hopping. Some of these elements definitely work better than others, but I'm always blown away at just how much variety there is with the game's platforming. The world is packed with things to do, and the game's stellar pacing prevents you from ever feeling like you're stuck in one place for too long. One minute you'll be scouring a sunken pirate ship, solving various puzzles in exchange for clues to the ship's password. And the next, you'll be overthrowing a corrupt ruler in the land of the clouds to reclaim the birthright of one of your comrades. Shortly after that, you'll find yourself diving headfirst into a volcano to do battle against a dragon and some knockoff Power Rangers. And I haven't even talked about the multitude of different minigames included along the way to keep things from getting stale. You'll go from rolling barrels downstream, to racing a minecart, to playing hide and seek with a man-child and his minions, to racing up a mountain on the backs of paratroopers, to impersonating a statue and gaslighting a disgruntled dodo by dodging his tantrum pecs, and so much more. By now, you must be thinking, okay, they got the battle system right, they got the overworld traversal right, what more could this game possibly have going for it? Well, perhaps most impressively, the characters and world building. These days, it'd be pretty easy to list off a bevy of Mushroom Kingdom locales or fan favorite characters that would be a perfect fit for a new Mario RPG. But you have to remember that back in 1996, the Mario universe just hadn't been that fleshed out yet. This was the pre-era. None of the Marios up to this point were particularly plot heavy, and the only real mainstay characters were Mario, Luigi, Peach, Bowser, Yoshi, maybe Toad, and even then, none of them had much of an established personality, beyond Bowser being the bad guy and Peach being the damsel in distress. And so the challenge was to take these relatively flat arcade game characters and worlds that have existed in some capacity for over a decade, and flesh them out into a fully realized, story-driven adventure. And the Mushroom Kingdom that was born of this endeavor is an absolute delight to behold. The game masterfully incorporates various locales and species from all of the existing Mario games into a world that feels cohesive and lived in. You've got the Mushroom Kingdom, Bowser's Castle, Peach's Castle, a volcano, a land in the clouds, an underwater section, a forest area, and these locales are bustling with familiar faces like Toads, Goombas, Yoshis, and Monty Moles. It's such an old game now, but it feels like a celebration of all things Mario up to that point. And yet despite all this, it avoids many of the pitfalls of more recent Mario RPGs by not letting those traditions shackle it from trying to do something unique. There's a plethora of fresh new areas, and even the ones that feel familiar are injected with new life by charming new characters. You do eventually end up with Mario, Bowser, and Peach in your party, but not before bringing two brand new characters into the fold, Mallow and Geno. These are two totally original characters created solely for this game, each with their own unique character design, story, and motivations. It's kind of funny saying this out loud now, because it's one of the only times Mario would ever stand side by side as equals with someone other than Luigi, or an alternate version of himself. Mallow has a really satisfying character arc, where he starts off as kind of a crybaby running errands for his grandpa, but then his grandpa tells him he's adopted, and he sets off along with Mario to find his real parents. Geno acts as a constant reminder of the stakes at hand. He's a warrior descended from Starhaven, tasked with retrieving the scattered star pieces before Smithy and his evil henchmen. His chance encounter with Mario establishes the group's goal for the rest of the game, which is to repair the Star Road, defeat the Smithy gang, and restore the power of dreams to the land. Now that all may sound a bit heavy, but the game strikes a critical balance between being serious and lighthearted. Once again differentiating itself from its contemporaries, Mario RPG livens things up by injecting a fair bit of humor into its dialogue and characters, but not at the expense of robbing the game of its more serious moments, like walking into Rose Town to find its citizens terrorized by poisonous arrows raining from the sky, or the creepy vibes of Seaside Town, in which you later learn the citizens have all been imprisoned and replaced with uncanny robotic clones. The leader of these clones would later go on to torture the village elder if you refused to submit to him. Tickle torture, of course. This ability to interweave darker storylines with comedic moments would become one of the defining characteristics of the series going forward, and would later lead to some of the most memorable storylines in Mario history. One thing that really helps set the tone of this game is its phenomenal soundtrack. Every single track on this OST is a gem, ranging from songs like this. How is this in a Mario game? To something way more upbeat. You've got some ominous music for the distressed towns you come across. And even though you'll be hearing it a lot, I just can't ever get tired of this one. Something about it just always puts me in a happy, ready to explore kind of mood. Did I forget to mention that every single boss theme is also a bop? I'm pretty stoked to hear the remix tracks as well, especially since the original composer, Yoko Shimomura, is returning to the helm. Thankfully, players will be given the option to choose which version of the soundtrack that they want to listen to. Personally, I'm looking forward to indulging my indecisiveness by switching it back and forth constantly. Now, I know it's sort of come to be expected for modern Mario RPGs to have these quippy one-liners, but even by today's standards, this game is pretty funny. I've played the game at least half a dozen times, and something still always manages to catch me off guard. Whether it's Booster planning his wedding with his incompetent minions, Bowser taking a moment to recite a haiku about himself leading up to the final battle, or the variety of snarky and eccentric toads. But I think the funniest part of the game for me is just how unhinged Mario acts when he's trying to explain something. As you'd expect, he has no spoken dialogue. This is also before Mario starts talking in Italian gibberish, so there are no voice clips of him in the game either. Rather, he's expressed entirely through animated motions and cartoon sound effects. His overly dramatic reenactments are so on point that it'll actually sometimes morph into the characters he's imitating. I'm pretty interested to see how this translates in the remake, because what really sells these moments for me are the cartoony retro sound effects. Aside from maybe some of the Mario and Luigi games, I don't think Mario himself is ever quite this cartoonish or goofy again. Luigi mostly takes over on that front. Even Bowser and Peach get some extra characterization beyond their typical one-dimensional roles. While she still spends much of the first half of the game as a damsel in distress, she flat out rejects this role and sneaks away from the safety of her castle to join Mario as soon as she's able. It's nothing truly groundbreaking, but in a series that hasn't always treated Peach with the most dignity, it's certainly a step in the right direction. Actually, more than Peach or Mario, the classic character that's given the most development here has gotta be Bowser. The game's introduction is a pretty clever reimagining of the traditional Mario quest to rescue Peach from the King of Koopas. In the span of a few minutes, the entire history of 2D Mario is recontextualized in an RPG setting. After summing up in a few minutes basically everything you need to know about Mario, the game quickly subverts expectations and introduces a brand new villain group into the fold, the Smithy Gang. I guess even in 1996, Bowser's role as the villain must have been getting kinda stale, because he doesn't even get to be the main villain until the second game in the series. But don't worry, there'll be plenty of Bowser villain time later on, trust me. In a historic change for his character, Bowser actually teams up with Mario, with his primary motivation being to get rid of the Smithy Gang so he can reclaim his castle and conquer the kingdom for himself. And it's through this role that Bowser's character gets expanded on for the first time. Instead of being a pure evil tyrant, he's kind of this goofy, self-absorbed, frail-egoed rival to Mario. He refuses to even really admit that they're working together as equals. Their entire alliance is under the guise of Mario and friends actually becoming members of his Koopa troop. This cocky, over-the-top attitude makes him a lot more interesting and lovable than in his past appearances. It's also this exact portrayal that would largely stick with him throughout the Mario franchise over the next 27 years or so. At least in the games where he's allowed to have a personality. The goofiness is definitely dialed down when the story calls for it, like in Paper Mario, where Bowser is pretty diabolical as the main antagonist. But these traits are still evident if you just take a quick peek at his diary. I've talked a lot about how impressive the game is for its time, and for the impact it would have on the Mario franchise going forward. But with the remake just over the horizon, it does beg the question, is Super Mario RPG worth playing today? Many RPGs have come and gone since 1996. Nintendo has had a dozen games across 27 years to tweak and improve upon this formula. So you have to wonder how it might compare to more modern titles in the franchise. Yeah, the modern Mario RPG franchise is pretty much non-existent at this point. The Paper Mario games have long since abandoned most of their RPG elements. There's certainly plenty of charm and fun to be had in Origami King, but the only real overlap between the two games at this point is funny Mario with action commands, sometimes. The Mario and Luigi series carried the torch for a bit longer, until Alpha Dream went bankrupt in 2019 and we haven't seen a new Mario and Luigi since. So fans have actually been starved of some more traditional Mario RPG action for quite some time now. Which makes it all the more exciting that remakes of two of the greatest such games were announced back to back. They didn't even wait for the first one to come out. If anything, making this video has convinced me that the appeal of playing Super Mario RPG in 2023 is kind of the same as it was back in 1996. Modern RPGs can last for dozens or even hundreds of hours. Not everyone wants to invest that kind of time into a game. If you ask me, it's the perfect time for Mario RPG to come along and do what it does best. Make RPGs more appealing and approachable for newcomers. It has a succinct, under 15-hour storyline that's dense with interesting locales and lovable characters. Overworld traversal is fun and exciting, with the addition of isometric platforming and the ability to avoid battles by leaping past enemies. Battles are enhanced with action commands that keep the player engaged whether they're attacking or defending. And all of this is presented in a familiar world with characters we already know and love. You don't need to spend hours getting to the good part, where you play as Baby Mario for 3 hours before learning that he and Bowser were actually best friends in middle school, or some shit, I don't know. The game quickly lures you in, with the tried and true Bowser kidnapping Peach routine, and then it quickly evolves into something brand new. Funny enough, having a villain other than Bowser will probably be just as welcome of a change in 2023 as it was in 1996. Probably more. In short, I think Super Mario RPG can be just as effective today at being a gateway drug to JRPGs as it was 27 years ago. Now, with all of this praise comes a healthy bit of criticism. The game hasn't aged flawlessly. While impressive at the time, the art style of the game has its limitations. There are some rough edges and odd color choices. I'm sure a lot of care went into the game's graphics, but some of these trees and other set pieces remind me of a time many years ago when I didn't know when to use a JPEG versus a PNG. Luckily, from everything we've seen so far, the remake is looking pretty stunning, while also staying faithful to those stubby little character designs. If you're going for full completion of the game, there are these invisible hidden blocks that you can find by jumping in suspicious places. Most players might find a handful or so on their first playthrough. Some are pretty tricky. I particularly hate this one where you have to wait on a Toad's head for him to stand in just the right spot so you can reach it. But worst of all, players who decide at the end of their journey that they want to go back and get 100% completion are in for a rude awakening, because there's a permanently missable one within the game's first half hour or so, and it's damn well hidden. Unless you're using a guide or have watched someone else play before, there's basically no way you would find this one. And even if you know it's there, your window for actually grabbing it is so small that it'll probably take you a few tries. So you better make sure you save beforehand. As of this recording, I'm not 100% sure if this will be in the remake, but if this Japanese article I found on the internet is to be believed, it looks like maybe it was addressed. Lastly, as much as the game does to keep combat engaging, like with all turn-based RPGs, there does come a point where encounters can start to feel repetitive, especially when playing the game for longer bursts. It seems like the remake may address this by rewarding perfectly timed hits by dealing some splash damage to nearby enemies. It's too early to say just how easy or difficult this will be to pull off, but if balanced correctly, it could help make some of the late game encounters a bit less tedious once you've mastered this mechanic. All in all, November 17th can't come quickly enough for me. I'm beyond excited to re-experience this game with a fresh coat of paint, as well as some new features and challenges. Super Mario RPG was the final Mario game to be released on the Super Nintendo in 1996. Mere months later, Super Mario 64 took the world by storm and set the standard for 3D platforming for decades to come. Now, over 27 years later, this cult classic has finally been given another chance to step out from Super Mario 64's shadow and be adorned by a brand new generation of gamers. While the game is still fully worthy of modern players' attention, Super Mario RPG deserves appreciation for the understated impact it had on the series as a whole. By all rights, Mario's first RPG outing should not have turned out as good as it did. It set the standard for not one, but two RPG series that would each receive at least a handful of entries over the following years. But perhaps the game's greatest legacy was to transform the Mushroom Kingdom into a vibrant, living world, brimming with endearing characters. Super Mario RPG proved that the Mario universe could be more than a mere strand of platforming obstacles, soulless Goombas, and bottomless pits. This legacy endures, continuing to shape the ever-expanding Mario universe we all enjoy today. Hey everyone, if you made it this far, thanks a lot for watching this celebration of one of my favorite games. The Mario RPG, Paper Mario, and Mario and Luigi games are all near and dear to me, and so I wanted to make sure that I did the games justice in my first video on them. I'd like to hear some of your favorite aspects or memories from the game too. Are you planning to pick up the remake that's releasing soon? And if so, will it be your first time experiencing the game, or are you a fellow elder who's played the game many times already? Would you be interested in seeing more videos like this on later entries in the series? Let me know in the comments section, and if you enjoyed the video, please remember to like and subscribe to stay up to date with the channel. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.